They found her lying in the dirt near the edge of town, barefoot, blood on her lip, dress torn where someone had grabbed her. No one stopped. Wagons creaked by. A preacher's wife pulled her child closer and looked away. She didn't cry anymore, not even when the dust settled in her mouth or when the noon sun scorched her back. She just laid still, like she was waiting to be swallowed up. He came at dusk, a shadow on horseback. No one knew his real name. Most just called him Hawk, and even that was whispered. He was Apache, kept to himself, lived outside town in the hills where the bones of old raids still scattered the canyons. People said he didn't talk. Not that he couldn't. He just didn't. They didn't like how quiet he was. Made them feel watched, like they'd been weighed. He saw her before she saw him. Just a small girl with her knees pulled up, skin raw from the sun, flies picking a scab on her cheek. When his horse stopped beside her, she didn't look up. Maybe she thought if she stayed still, he'd go away like the rest. But he didn't. He dismounted without a sound, boots landing soft in the dust. He stood there for a long time, just looking down at her. She finally raised her head, eyes red but dry. She was maybe 11, maybe 12, too young to wear that kind of tired in her face. He crouched, reached into the leather pouch at his belt, and pulled out canteen, held it out to her without a word. She looked at it like it might bite. Then she reached for it. Her hand shook. The water hit her stomach and made her choke. He didn't flinch, just waited till she drank slower. When she finished, he reached into his coat and pulled out a hunk of dried meat. She stared again, then took it. She didn't ask who he was. He didn't ask her name. When he stood, she thought he was going to leave. She tensed like maybe she was used to being left behind. But instead, he held out his hand. She blinked. He didn't repeat himself, just waited. Her little fingers slid into his palm. No one saw them ride out. No one cared. It wasn't the first time a girl ended up in the dirt. It wasn't the first time someone disappeared. But by the next morning, folks were talking. They were talking because Old Man Dyer's dog found blood on the back path behind the mercantile. Sheriff Loman found a ribbon snagged on the fence post, same shade of blue that girl had been wearing. He also found a boot print he didn't recognize. Small, deep in the heel, someone had run hard from that spot. Loman scratched his head, then chewed the end of his pencil. He didn't like things he couldn't explain, especially when they made folks nervous. And that girl, that quiet, busted-up thing nobody had seen before, she made people nervous just by being there. They said Hawk took her, said he must have had something to do with whatever happened behind the store. They whispered about old blood feuds, about raiders taking children and raising them as their own. They didn't care that he lived alone, that he kept his distance, that he hadn't touched a soul in years. Loman didn't say much, but he watched the hills with his rifle closer than before. Up there, the girl sat in silence beside a low fire. Hawk's horse grazed in the tall grass, and Hawk himself worked on something with his hands, carving, whittling, shaping something from a pale strip of wood. He hadn't asked her anything, but when she woke from nightmares, he was always nearby. When she shook so bad she couldn't hold a spoon, he fed her. She started talking on the third day. "My name's Lena." He didn't say anything. "My mama's name was Ruth." "I don't know my daddy." Still silence. "They hit me. I ran." She watched his eyes, tried to read something, but there was nothing but steady quiet. She looked at the fire. "I think they killed her." The night was thick with crickets and something heavier, grief that had nowhere to go. "I don't remember much. Just sounds." She didn't know why she kept talking. Maybe it was because she had kept it in for so long. It had to come out. Maybe because he didn't interrupt her. He didn't judge. "I've been hungry before, but not like that. Not where your stomach turns on you. Starts eating itself." He placed a blanket over her shoulders. That night, she slept without waking. The town didn't sleep so easy. A few folks said they should send riders out, look for the girl. A few others said good riddance. But the ones with daughters, they got quieter. The blacksmith's wife wouldn't let their child go near the mercantile alone. Miss Tally, the schoolmarm, started walking the long way home to avoid the back alley. Sheriff Loman told them all to settle down. Still, He rode the edge of town more often now, watched the hills through his scope. Lena followed Hawk through the rocks. He showed her how to walk without sound, how to feel for water by the shape of the land. He never said why he helped her. She never asked. Maybe he saw something in her, some piece of himself from another time. When she sat down too hard from her bruises, he waited. Where her breath hitched in her chest from fear, he didn't speak, but he didn't walk away either. She noticed how he touched the land like it was a friend, how he didn't kill unless he had to, how he carved little birds out of scrap wood and left them on stumps like gifts to no one. She started carving too. One morning, Lena woke to see him sharpening a long blade. Her stomach clenched, but he wasn't looking at her. He was looking toward the horizon, where the wind carried sound. Footsteps, voices, dogs. She looked at him. He nodded once, not to calm her, but to tell her it was time. Time to move. Time to face whatever waited in that town. Because whatever truth was buried behind the mercantile, it was stirring now. And if Hawk had anything to do with it, the people who watched a girl bleed in the dirt were going to remember her name. The first time Lena saw the inside of Hawk's cabin, she hesitated at the door. It wasn't what she expected. Nothing like the tight, dirty corner she'd crouched in before, hiding from slamming boots and loud men. This place smelled like cedar and smoke, not blood and sweat. The floor was swept clean, though worn with years. A single cot, some shelves with tools and herbs, and animal hides draped over the beams. There was no clutter, no mess. Just quiet, same as him. He gestured for her to sit on a wool blanket near the fire. She obeyed, careful not to touch anything. Her fingers twitched in her lap, too used to being told she'd broken something just by breathing near it. But Hawk didn't even glance her way after she sat down. He moved around the small cabin with the same silent purpose he always had. Built the fire up, boiled water, skinned a rabbit. By then, she'd already learned he wasn't going to hurt her. But she still didn't know why he'd taken her in. Maybe he didn't either. The days started to fall into a kind of rhythm. Lena helped where she could, scrubbing pots, sweeping dust out, chopping vegetables with a small blade he finally let her use. He never said no, never said much of anything. But sometimes, after dark, he'd hum low to himself while grinding herbs or braiding rawhide. It wasn't a tune she knew. Maybe it wasn't a song at all, just sound to keep the ghosts out. In the town below, one of those ghosts had a name. Her name was Alma Dunn. She worked at the laundry behind the church, kept her head down, her collar high. But she had eyes in every direction. When a preacher's wife came by to whisper rumors over socks and linens, Alma listened, lips tight. When children lingered too long near the alleys, she called them back with a single look. She had seen Lena once, days before she disappeared into the hills. Alma was hanging sheets when she spotted the girl outside the mercantile, crouched near a trash bin, gnawing something hard and stale. Lena had flinched when the door slammed, and then again when a man stepped out behind her. Tall, boots too clean. Alma remembered because he'd touched the girl's arm like he owned her, and the girl hadn't looked up. That man hadn't been from town. She knew every face in that dust-bitten stretch, and his wasn't one of them. She didn't speak on it yet. Not then. But she watched the sheriff, watched the trail prints behind the store, watched how no one wanted to remember seeing the girl at all. Something didn't sit right. Back in the hills, Lena was healing. Her bruises were turning yellow, and her cuts had scabbed over. But it was the ache inside her that took longer. Hawk didn't ask her to explain it. But one night, as they sat outside under a sky big enough to hold all the things she'd lost, she began to tell him more. He locked the door from the outside, said I was his now. Mama never knew. She didn't need to say what else happened. Hawk didn't blink, but something about his body changed. A stillness that wasn't peaceful. That man, she whispered. He gave me candy first, told me I was pretty. Then he said I owed him. The way her voice cracked, it made Hawk look up. He's the one behind the mercantile. She didn't know if he believed her, but he reached into his coat and placed something in her hand. One of the birds he'd carved. Its wings curled inward like it was sheltering from the wind. Keep it, he said. the first word he ever spoke to her. That same week, a stranger came into town. Not the kind you notice at first. He was quiet, polite, had a limp and a long scar down the side of his neck. Said he was looking for someone. Showed a sketch to the saloon owner, the blacksmith, and Miss Tally. The face was a young girl's. The stranger's name was Benjamin Cale. He was a Pinkerton man, retired, some said. A bounty hunter, others guessed. But all anyone really knew was that he didn't drink, didn't flirt, and didn't take kindly to questions. He caught up with Alma behind the laundry house. Asked her about the girl in the drawing. Alma didn't speak right away. She stared at the paper too long. Then she nodded once and said, "She was here. She's gone now." Benjamin narrowed his eyes. Gone where? Alma didn't answer. That night, he sat in the sheriff's office long after sunset, sliding the paper back and forth across the desk. Name's Lena Monroe. Vanished near the Oklahoma line. Mother was a runaway. Girl's got no people left. Sheriff Lohman stared at the sketch. She's the one that was bleeding behind my mercantile? Could be. Lohman grunted. Or she's the one who made trouble and ran. Benjamin raised a brow. You think a 12-year-old carved her own bruises? I think she's not here now, and that suits the town fine. Benjamin's fingers tapped the desk. What suits the town don't always match the truth. The tension in the room sat thick between them. Meanwhile, Lena started talking more in the cabin, asking hot questions he didn't answer. Do you have kids? Silence. Did someone hurt you too? More silence. She wasn't trying to pry, but she felt like maybe knowing what broke him might help patch something in her. One day, Hawk finally said, I had a sister. She turned, surprised. Her name was Ista. Men took her when I was young. I found her 3 winters later, but she wasn't a child anymore. She didn't speak. Lena's breath caught. What happened? She walked into the river one morning before I woke. Never came back. That was all he said, but it explained everything. Lena placed her bird carving next to his on the shelf. 2 little wooden shapes facing the window. In town, the talk was building. Alma finally told the preacher's wife what she saw. Word got to Benjamin. The sheriff wasn't pleased. He knew if enough people started asking about what happened behind his stores, what he let slide, there'd be trouble. Especially since the man Alma described, the one with clean boots, matched a name Benjamin had heard before. Jonas Witt. He was wanted in 2 states. For things folks didn't like saying out loud. For girls going missing. For lies told in backrooms. And if Jonas had been in this town, that meant someone here let him through. Someone who looked the other way. Someone who might do it again. The walls were starting to close in. And high in the hills, Lena woke up sweating from a dream she didn't remember, clutching the carved bird so hard the edges dug into her skin. Hawk sat near the door, knife in hand, watching the trees, waiting. The first time Lena laughed, it startled both of them. She had been chasing a squirrel that darted up the rocks behind Hawk's cabin, her bare feet quick and light on the stone. She tripped, caught herself, and turned around grinning, a flash of mischief on her face that hadn't been there in weeks. The sound of her laughter cracked the heavy stillness that always hung in the trees like fog. Hawk looked up from the firewood he was chopping and watched her. She looked freer than he'd ever seen her. No shadows in her eyes, no fear in her steps. She froze when she caught him watching. The smile faded a little, but then something shifted. Hawk gave a nod, the corner of his mouth twitching in what might have been a smile of his own. It was small, barely there, but Lena saw it. And for some reason, that was enough to make her chest feel lighter. That night, she offered to cook. Hawk didn't stop her. He handed her what they had, beans, a bit of salt pork, and wild onions she'd helped gather that morning. She stirred it in the pot, humming under her breath. He sat by the fire, sharpening his stone blade, but his eyes flicked over to her every now and then, like he was making sure she was still there. I think I used to sing before, she said quietly. My mama, she liked hymns. Hawk didn't say anything, but he looked up. She had a soft voice. I remember it best when she brushed my hair. Sometimes I can still feel it. The wind moved through the trees, carrying her words up into the hills. You don't have to talk, she added. but I'm glad you're here." She wasn't sure if he heard her, but he stayed close that night, sleeping in the doorway like always, between her and whatever could come down from the trees. Over the next few days, the hills became less of a hiding place and more of a home. Hawk showed her how to grind corn with stones, how to use the stars to find her direction, how to build a snare trap. Lena learned quickly. She had sharp eyes, small hands, and a steady mind. He gave her small tasks at first, then harder ones. By the end of the week, she was setting traps on her own and skinning rabbits without flinching. One morning, she asked if he could teach her how to track. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. They set out in silence, moving through the brush like wind. He pointed to the way twigs bent in one direction, to hoof marks in the mud, to broken spider webs that meant something had passed through recently. She didn't speak, just followed and watched. Eventually, she whispered, "Were you a scout?" He glanced at her, nodded. "For who?" He hesitated, then said quietly, "For the army. A long time ago." She blinked. That wasn't what she expected. She didn't press. But it made her think about how someone like him, who barely spoke, who lived on the edge of the world, had once worked for the very people who feared him now. What must have happened to make him leave that life? Or had they thrown him away? In town, the pressure was building. Sheriff Lohman didn't want any part of Benjamin Cale's questions anymore. He kept claiming the girl wasn't his concern, that no one saw where she went. But Benjamin was patient. Too patient. He talked to everyone. Farmhands, stable boys, kitchen girls. And what he gathered began to point to one name. Jonas Witt. Except Witt hadn't just disappeared. He'd been protected. Slipped out with someone's help. And Benjamin suspected Lohman knew who. But Lohman had power. And fear worked harder than justice. Still, whispers grew. Alma spoke again, this time to the preacher himself. She didn't give names, but her eyes said enough. That girl wasn't lying, she said. She didn't make nothing up. And it was enough to plant doubt in the town's heart. Back in the hills, Lena found a small creek one morning and decided to wash. The cold water bit at her skin, but she liked the way it made her feel awake. Clean. Real. She looked at her reflection and almost didn't recognize herself. The bruises were fading. Her eyes weren't so sunken. She touched her cheek and felt skin instead of bone. When she came back to the cabin, Hawk was boiling pine needles and bark. "For your cough," he said. Lena's eyes widened. "You made that for me." He gave a single nod. It was the most he'd said in days. She took the cup and sipped. It was bitter but warm. She smiled into it. "I had a dream last night," she said. "I dreamed we went to town, but nobody looked at me like I was nothing. They looked scared of me, like they knew I mattered." Hawk stirred the pot on the fire. "In the dream, you stood behind me. Didn't say a word. Just stood there. And I felt strong. Because you didn't leave." There was a long pause. Then Hawk said, "We'll go soon." She looked up. "Go." He nodded. Not to run, to finish. Lena felt something flutter in her chest. Fear. And something else. Maybe hope. Will it be dangerous? Yes. She looked down at her hands. "Will I get to speak?" He nodded. "You will." She whispered, "Then I'm ready." For the next few days, they prepared. Hawk taught her how to hold a knife. Not to use it, but to carry it. Not for fear, but for courage. He stitched a small pouch for her and filled it with roots and salt and flint. She learned how to walk in the wind so no one could track her scent. How to breathe from her stomach when fear tried to steal her voice. She also started to remember things. Bits and pieces. The way Jonas's voice turned sweet when he lied. The smell of his coat. The sound of the lock clicking behind her. The way the light never reached the corner of that room. Each time she remembered, she told Hawk. Each time he listened. One night, she woke crying. Not from fear, but from anger. "I want him to be afraid," she said. Hawk didn't speak, but his eyes said he understood. The day they packed to leave, the skies turned gray. It hadn't rained in weeks, but the clouds rolled heavy and low. Hawk said it was good. Rain would wash their trail. Hide them. It was time. Lena strapped on her boots, the ones he'd repaired for her. Wore the coat He let her choose from the back wall. Her hands trembled, but she didn't cry. They rode down the long slope toward town, quiet as ever. The trees thinned. The path grew clearer, and the buildings started to rise from the dust like they were waiting. When they got to the edge of town, Hawk stopped. "You lead," he said. Lena blinked. "Me? You know the truth." She swallowed, nodded. Her heart was pounding so loud it felt like her ribs would crack. But she dismounted, held her head high. They walked the main street slowly, and it didn't take long for people to notice. Curtains shifted. Men paused with their tools. A boy dropped his ball in the street and just stared. The sheriff was the first to step outside. His face went pale. Hawk didn't look at him. Lena did. She didn't say anything yet, just stared, then walked past him toward the mercantile. There, in the alley behind it, she stopped. "This is where he grabbed me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. "He dragged me behind the crates. Told me to be quiet. Said nobody'd care if I screamed." A few townsfolk had followed them now. Alma stood near the church, hands clasped. Benjamin stood just behind Hawk. "This town watched me bleed," Lena said, and turned away. No one spoke. She looked at the crowd. Jonas would as a predator. He wasn't alone. Someone here protected him. Then she turned to Loman. "And I think you know who." The sheriff opened his mouth, but Benjamin stepped forward. "We have testimony, enough to put this town on trial." And suddenly, the storm broke. Rain poured down, soaking the dust, the rooftops, the silence. But no one moved. Lena stood tall in the middle of it all, arms at her side, water running down her face like it was washing off everything that had ever clung to her. Hawk stepped behind her. Not in front, behind. And in that moment, something shifted, not in the town, not in the law, but in her. She wasn't the girl in the dirt anymore. She was the one they had to answer to. The rain didn't stop for 2 days after Lena stood in that alley and spoke. It pounded the rooftops, soaked the dirt roads, turned paths into streams. And in its wake, the town fell quiet again, but not the kind of quiet that brings peace. It was the kind that comes when people start realizing they've been part of something ugly, something too easy to ignore until someone points at it and names it out loud. Lena stayed in Alma's laundry house while Hawk camped just outside town near the tree line. He didn't like walls. Never had. And maybe now he liked them even less, being back among the people who once looked right through him. But he came into town each evening, just after the lanterns were lit, just after the doors were locked, and sat with Lena while she ate. At first, the townspeople didn't speak to her. They passed her on the street without nodding, even when their eyes lingered too long. Miss Tally offered her an apple once, but fumbled it like she wasn't sure if she should be seen doing it. Alma stayed close, but she too had limits. She'd done what she could. Now the rest would be up to Lena. The sheriff had vanished the morning after the storm. Benjamin suspected he'd taken off with whatever bribes or blackmail he'd been sitting on. That left the town without law, but also without interference. The county marshal was days away, maybe weeks, which meant Lena was exposed. And everyone knew it. That first night in the laundry house, after the warmth of Hawk's quiet company had faded and the fire had burned down low, Lena pulled her knees up and stared at the ceiling. She should have felt proud, should have felt strong, but the silence felt heavier than ever, and her stomach knotted with doubt. "What if it doesn't matter?" she whispered to the dark. "What if no one really cares?" Her fingers dug into the blanket. She remembered Jonas's breath on her neck, the way his smile stayed even as he hurt her. She remembered how many people had looked away while she limped through town, how easy it was to be invisible when no one wants to see, and she was terrified, not just of Jonas finding her again, but of the possibility that all her pain might mean nothing, that she'd poured her story out like water into dust, and the world would just keep walking. The next morning, a bottle was thrown through Alma's window. Glass shattered across the washroom floor, soaking soap and blood into the cracked wood. Lena stood frozen as Alma pulled her back and swept the mess aside. There was no note, no name, just rage, the kind that didn't want truth spoken. Hawk arrived a few minutes later, silent as ever, but his jaw clenched. He picked through the glass and found part of a boot print on the windowsill. "Town scared," Olmus said, "but scared folk don't always do the right thing. Sometimes they just bite back." Lena didn't cry, but she didn't sleep that night either. Her memories were coming in pieces now, sharp, jagged ones. Jonas's voice behind her, the creak of that storage room door, the splinter in the floor she stared at while she sat up, shaking her chest tight. She wanted to run again. Into the hills, into the dark, into anywhere but here. Hawk found her the next morning, curled up behind the water barrels. She didn't hear him come, just looked up and saw his shadow. He didn't speak, just knelt down and held out his hand. But this time she didn't take it. "I'm not strong," she said. "Everyone thinks I am, but I'm not." He didn't move, just waited. "I hate him," she whispered. "I hate that he touched me, that I couldn't stop it, that even now, it still feels like he's inside me somewhere." Her voice broke on the last word. She dropped her head into her hands. "I want to burn it all down," she said. "Not just him, the town, the silence, everything." Hawk's voice, when it came, was quiet. "That's not weakness." She looked up, eyes rimmed with red. "Then what is?" "Living with it," he said, letting it settle and choosing not to become it. She stared at him. "I couldn't save my sister," he said, "but I can walk beside you, if you want me to." And finally, she reached for his hand. That afternoon, Benjamin returned with word that Jonas had been spotted near the next county line. He was traveling alone, under a false name, heading north. He'd likely heard about Lena speaking up and was running before someone tied his name to the girl he'd marked. "We can track him," Benjamin said, "but the law will be slow. They'll want statements, proofs, maybe even a witness to his confession." "I'll go," Lena said. Benjamin turned. "You sure?" She nodded. "He doesn't get a run. Not this time." Alma pulled her aside before they left, pressed a folded scarf into her palm. "You don't have to be the one to catch him," she said. "You already did enough." But Lena shook her head. "I have to finish it." So they rode, Hawk, Lena, and Benjamin, into the deep brush where maps faded and rumors bloomed. They tracked him through creek beds and ghost roads, piecing together reports from ranchers and tavern hands. And with each step closer, Lena grew quieter. Not from fear, from focus. But that didn't stop the nightmares. She saw Jonas in every shadow, heard his laugh in the wind. One night, she ran from the fire without thinking, ran deep into the woods until she couldn't hear anyone. She dropped to the dirt and dug her nails into the soil, gasping like she was drowning. When Hawk found her, she didn't speak, just held on to him like a child. "I can't make it stop," she said. "I thought if I said it out loud, it would leave me." "It won't," he said, "but it gets quieter." "How long?" "A lifetime." She nodded against his chest. "Then I'll carry it," she said. "But he will too." They caught up with Jonas at a half-burned cabin near the edge of a dried-out orchard. He looked thinner, meaner, but his eyes hadn't changed. When he saw her, his face didn't even twitch. "Well," he said, "aren't you a stubborn little thing?" Lena didn't flinch. She stepped forward. "No more hiding," she said. "No more silence." He sneered. "No one's going to believe you. You were always just a broken little girl." But his words didn't land the way they once did. "I was," she said, "but now I'm not." Benjamin moved in behind her, badge showing. "You're done with," he said. "You run again, and it won't be cuffs we bring." Jonas started a lunge, but Hawk stepped forward like a wall. The moment passed in a breath. Jonas stopped, saw the blade on Hawk's belt, the look in Lena's eyes, the gun at Benjamin's side. And then, finally, he dropped his hands. The ride back to town was slow, quiet, but different than before. Lena felt the pain still there, still heavy, but not alone, not unwitnessed. When they arrived, people were waiting. Not in fear this time, not in judgment, but in apology. And even that was not enough, but it was a start. Because justice doesn't fix what was broken, but it tells the girl in the dirt that she was never the one who should have felt shame. The first night Jonas would sat behind the bars of the old town jail, The rain returned. Thin at first, then harder, like the sky had been holding its breath and finally exhaled. The cells hadn't been used in years. Dust clung to the walls, iron flaked from the bars, and the lock barely turned. But it was enough. Jonas didn't ask for a lawyer, didn't shout for his innocence. He just stared at the ceiling like none of it touched him, like he was biding his time. Lena watched him from across the corridor, arms folded, heart a drumbeat in her ears. The door between them stayed open, but Huck stood beside her, silent as always, and Benjamin kept one hand on his hip where the gun sat easy. Jonas looked up, smirked. Didn't think you'd show your face. Lena didn't answer at first. She just stepped closer into the doorway, eyes on the man who had broken her body, and laughed while doing it. You used to think I wouldn't fight back, she said, voice low. You used to think I'd stay small, stay scared. He shrugged. You were easy. A girl like you. No one was going to care. The words hit like gravel, but she didn't flinch. Not anymore. You were wrong. Jonas leaned forward. What do you want, Lena? You got your justice. You got your little audience. I'm locked up. So what now? Lena stepped inside the room. Benjamin started forward, but she held up a hand. She needed this. Not just for the law, but for her. I want to say it to your face, she said, that you didn't win. That even if you haunt my dreams for the rest of my life, I'll still know one thing. I got away. I survived. Jonas's eyes narrowed. You think survival makes you strong? She nodded. I know it does. He leaned back, jaw twitching. Lena walked closer to the bars. Her heart pounded so hard she felt in her hands, but she didn't stop. You pick girls who wouldn't speak, she said. You pick people no one would protect. But I'm not quiet anymore. And I'm not the only one. Jonas laughed, but it was hollow. What do you want me to say? That I'm sorry. No, she said. I want you to remember my face. I want you to remember that I lived. He said nothing. She stood there a while longer, looking at him, at the monster she once thought was bigger than the world. But now, behind rusted bars and sour breath, he looked smaller, like all bullies do when the crowd leaves. And she turned and walked out. The next morning, the courthouse was packed. Word had spread. Everyone knew what Jonas had done now. Alma testified first. Then a ranch hand who remembered hearing something behind the mercantile that night. Then Miss Tally, who recalled Lena's bruises and how the girl never looked her in the eyes. Lena waited until the end. She stood, shoulders square, hands shaking but steady. I was 12, she began. I thought I was invisible. And maybe I was. But what happened to me, it wasn't my fault. She looked around the room, at the women who once turned their faces, at the men who whispered about how girls lie. I didn't lie, she said. I didn't ask for what happened. And it shouldn't have taken me nearly dying for you to notice. Her voice cracked once, but she didn't stop. I thought silence would protect me, that if I stayed quiet, the pain would leave. But it didn't. It grew, until it swallowed everything. She looked straight at Jonas. But I chose to speak. And that was the beginning of taking my life back. The courtroom fell still. Some lowered their heads. Others finally looked her in the eyes. And Jonas didn't smirk this time. He just stared. That night, Huck found her outside the town church, staring at the sky again. The stars were clear for once. No clouds, no wind, just stillness. He sat beside her, wordless. For a long time, she said nothing. Then, finally, do you think she would have done it? Your sister. He turned. Speak up. Lena asked. Tell the truth. He nodded slowly. I think she wanted to. Lena watched the stars. Then I'll speak for her too. She pulled out the small bird carving he'd given her, the first one. Its edges were worn from where she'd held it in her fist during every hard night. She pressed it into his hand. You gave me this to hold on to, she said. But I think maybe it was yours first. He looked at it a long time. Then, gently, placed it back in her palm. It's yours now, he said. The next day, Jonas was taken under armed guard to await transport for trial. The town watched him go, some in shame, some in silence. But no one cheered. Lena didn't watch from the street. She stood on the church steps, back straight, shoulders square. When the wagon rolled out of sight, she closed her eyes. And for the first time in a long while, she didn't see Jonas when she did. She saw her mother, smiling. She saw herself, not the girl in the dirt, but the one who got up. The days that followed weren't perfect. People still stared. Some still whispered. But more came forward now. A girl Lena had never met knocked on the laundry house door one evening. Eyes down, voice soft. "It happened to me too," she said. Lena didn't speak. She just opened the door and let her in. Others came after. Not to confess, not to explain, but to listen. The silence had cracked open. And in its place, something else was starting to grow. One morning, Lena went to the hill above town, to the flat rock where the sky felt close. Hawk waited there. Just as he had the day, he brought her up to teach her how to track. He handed her a piece of wood, a carving knife. She blinked. "You're ready," he said. She sat beside him and started to shape the wood. Her hands were steadier now, her eyes sharper. "What are you carving?" he asked. She smiled faintly. "A girl with wings," she said. "But not the kind you run away on. The kind you use to rise." He didn't say anything, but he carved one too. Two figures side by side, taking shape in the light. The mornings felt different after Jonas was gone. Not because the world had suddenly turned bright. Lena knew better than to expect that, but because the weight on her chest had shifted. It wasn't gone, but it wasn't crushing her anymore. She could breathe without flinching now, sleep without the knife clutched in her fist. The pain had softened into something she could carry. The town was still uneasy, like folks weren't sure how to treat her. Some avoided her, still uncomfortable with the truth she'd forced them to face. But others, like Miss Tally and the stable boy who used to laugh too loud, started nodding when she passed. Little gestures, small cracks in the silence. Alma let her stay as long as she wanted in the room above the laundry house. But Lena didn't unpack her bag. She spent more time up in the hills again with Hawk. The quiet of the land helped her think, helped her sort through everything the storm had left behind. One evening, just after the sun dipped below the ridge, she sat with Hawk near the fire outside his cabin. They didn't speak much, as usual, but it wasn't the silence that hurt anymore. It was a silence that held space. "Safe, steady." She turned toward him. "You knew, didn't you?" He looked up from the bowl he was carving. "Knew what?" "That I'd come back. That I wouldn't run forever." He nodded. "I saw it in your eyes." She smiled faintly. "I didn't see it in mine. Not for a long time." Hawk didn't respond with words. Instead, he reached into the pouch beside him and pulled out a new carving. It was smaller than the others, a bird again, but this one with its wings fully spread, mid-flight. He handed it to her, and for the first time, their hands lingered when they touched. Lena looked down at it, then back at him. Her throat tightened. "Why did you stay in the hills?" she asked. "All this time." He didn't look away from the fire. "Because I knew what people saw when they looked at me. A shadow. A warning. Not a man." Lena's eyes burned. "But you never stopped helping," she whispered. "I help when I can, and I disappear when I can't." She reached for his hand again, this time with intention. "You don't have to disappear anymore." He met her gaze. His fingers wrapped around her slowly. Not a question, not a promise, just a quiet acknowledgement of something real. That night, Lena stayed. They didn't talk about it. They didn't have to. She rested her head against his chest as the firelight flickered across the walls. The night air was cool, but she didn't feel cold. For the first time since her mother's voice had gone quiet, she felt held. Not just in his arms, but in something larger. In the life she had begun again. The days passed gently. They worked side by side in the garden Hawk had once ignored. He showed her how to dig with care, how to read clouds, how to carry water from the creek without spilling. She taught him how to patch worn fabric and how to tie strong knots in fraying rope. The scar in her mind didn't vanish, but it didn't bleed anymore. And the nightmares, when they came, no longer stole her voice. She learned how to wake herself, how to breathe slow, how to reach out and find him already awake, already waiting. One morning, she returned to town on her own. Not for any big reason, just to visit Alma, to help scrub linens and boil soap. It felt good to be useful, to do something with her hands. A young girl stopped outside the laundry house while Lena was wringing out a blanket. She looked about 10, small, quiet-eyed. She didn't say anything at first, just hovered. Then she asked softly, "Are you the girl who told the truth?" Lena dried her hands, knelt down. "I am," she said. The girl nodded, as if confirming something she needed to believe. "Thank you," she whispered, then ran off. Lena stood there for a long while, not crying, just breathing. That evening, when she returned to the cabin, she found Hawk on the porch, watching the valley. He looked at her, and she nodded once. "I think I'm ready," she said. "For what?" "To stay. For real." He didn't ask her what that meant. He just moved aside so she could sit next to him. They watched the sky together, full of golden streaks and the hush of wind through tall grass. No more plans, no more running, just the stillness of a world that had hurt them both and the quiet strength of building something anyway. Later that week, they built a second chair beside the fire. She made it. He helped. They laughed once when it leaned too far to the right. But by the next morning, it stood strong. Like her, that was the beginning. Not of forgetting, but of becoming something new. Together.